So I think we're moving to our next item on the agenda, which is a workshop on amendments to the Shoreline Master Program, Comprehensive Plan, and zoning related to the Deepwater Port area and areas southwest of the Marine Terminal area. Turn it over to staff.
All right. Just so I can see it too. Mary Cunningham, Planning, and I promise I will be briefer than last meeting. The port came forward this year as part of the docket cycle and submitted an application to make their comprehensive plan and zoning boundaries consistent with the Shoreline Master Program boundaries. And after reviewing that, looking at a lot of what we've done in the past, we realized it was a staff error. They're supposed to be consistent, but we made an error in a 2003 ordinance update, so staff took over the application. And then in the process, we found a few more inconsistencies that we want to address at the same time. So in those 2003 ordinances, the boundary for the Shoreline Master Program, which was actually adopted in 2002, said the boundary between the Deepwater Port and the Conservancy area, which is the public access beach just to the south, was 200 feet north of Pigeon Creek. And both the ordinances for 2003 that amended the comp plan and zoning both use that same text description saying the boundary was 200 feet from Pigeon Creek, but the maps in there ended up moving that line somehow to a property line further north. So the maps are inconsistent with the text, and we wanted to go back and make sure they're all consistent. The other thing we found out while looking at this is since 2003, we've updated our stream layer based on LIDAR data and a lot of new planning that's been done associated with our surface water comprehensive plan updates. So we had the Shoreline Master Program had the stream in the wrong location. So when we measured 200 feet from the if we use the current stream boundary and measured 200 feet from that, we wouldn't be where we wanted the boundary to be. So we're proposing to use language related to a line parallel to the existing fence line between the south terminal and the beach. And then at the end of that fence, making a curve to be parallel with the north property line where that current comprehensive plan boundary was placed. And the port had a surveyor as part of their application give us those dimensions and directions. So we're proposing to use those to define that boundary. We also, in looking at this, started to look at the two areas directly abutting this to see how they were described. In the comprehensive plan, we have an Aquatic Conservancy area adjacent, and then the beach was designated Conservancy. So, and then we found out the Aquatic Conservancy text description overlapped into the Deepwater Port. The way that it was mapped. And so the map shows, and here the area of conflict where the assessment, we use the Snohomish Estuary Wetland Integration Plan assessment units to define, that were highly rated to define where those boundaries were going to be. The classification criteria for the Aquatic Conservancy were those nearshore assessment units south and west of the port south terminal, and it specifically calls out assessment unit 704, which is in that conflict area. So, but it wasn't mapped that way in the SMP. So the proposal is to clarify that it's all of assessment unit 7.04, except for the area that's within the Deepwater Port designation. And then we also figured out when we were looking at the Conservancy areas that we had them all mapped the way we wanted them, but they weren't specifically designated in the SMP the way all the other Conservancy areas are. So the proposal is to add text for all these, the light green Conservancy areas between the Mukilteo Tank Farm and the South Terminal, and just add text and say those are specifically designated Conservancy. So that affects 3 of the different maps along the nearshore areas. And it's primarily the areas between the residential and the beach, so a lot of the BNSF properties, and then all the wetlands associated with the streams along that corridor. And while this was going on, we were looking at these changes, we also got new information on harbor lines from the Corps of Engineers and the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. And this map in front of you shows those boundaries. The yellow boundaries are the federal pierhead lines that are also harbor lines. And then the red, the other boundaries are all state DNR harbor lines. So the red ones are the outer harbor lines for the state, and there's a blue side harbor line in the east. This is part of the East Waterway. And the boundaries that's current defined in the East Waterway says it goes to the outer harbor line / pierhead line. But it turns out those are not the same thing. The Navy did not, or the Corps of Engineers, when the Navy base was built, they granted them authorization to build outside the harbor lines. They didn't change their harbor lines, but the state actually changed their harbor lines as part of the whole Navy base construction. So the current proposal for within the East Waterway, is to follow the state outer harbor line around here and the state side harbor line. So that would be the waterward boundary in the East Waterway. Whoops. But then on the west side of the Navy base, it turns out there's not a harbor line. We had a survey that was provided to us when we were updating the Shoreline Master Program that showed that there was that there was a federal harbor line that ran up this way. And, but that doesn't exist according to what the Corps and the state are telling us now. And that was an error based on some survey lines. So we got a survey from the Navy base that was done, and we're proposing to use their boundaries for the west side. And this is looking, all the survey sheets are in your packet, and they're a little difficult to follow, but this is where'd it go? This is the south end of the Navy base where the piers are. It's parcel F1. This is going up the west side into the channel. And then there's these areas that are not within their parcels, but they've been granted a land use and occupancy area that they have the right to use. So the boundary would follow the outer edge of that land use and occupancy area up to the north end of the Navy base. And this is what it would look like on the SMP map. Up at the blue line would be the Deepwater Port boundaries. Up at on the west side of the Navy base, the boundary goes out a little bit further into the water than it does on the current maps, into that land use and occupancy area. The shoreline map still looks different from the comprehensive plan and zoning map because it only includes the areas that are within 200 feet of the ordinary high water mark, generally in the aquatic areas. But the proposed comprehensive plan and zoning boundaries would still have those same outer boundaries, but then they extend further inland to encompass the whole Navy base and the Kimberly-Clark site and the port's properties. So the proposal is to just make all these corrections and send them forward at the same time as the waterfront place proposal. And I'm hoping I don't find any more errors. Any questions?
It doesn't have any material effect on any navigation or anything that, any shipping that occurs. It's basically just sort of a documentation exercise? Or does
Right, it just corrects things for our purposes. The Corps can authorize construction wherever they want to. The Navy base, we don't really have any permitting authority over them in general at this time, so it's merely a map correction exercise. It won't affect our permitting.
I see.
Yeah, the buildings you see on the Navy base that have been built, we don't have any review authority of it. It's a Navy base, federal property, so they have a master plan that was approved and they follow their master plan. So.
Question. Do any of the corrections that you're talking about have any negative impacts on the Kimberly-Clark property? Does it change any designations or?
No, it just clarifies that we're talking the state harbor line versus the federal harbor line, pierhead line, but it's the same line on the map that was shown. That part's just a text amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And that was our last item for tonight's agenda. So, any other comments? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Thank you.